I think a lot of us overhear conversations like we don't get an explicit education about this, but we'll talk to our friends and they're like, oh, you need an LLC, right? So a lot of us have this knee-jerk feeling like I'm not official until I have an LLC. And so I want to dispel some myths and some rumors about this and tell you kind of what is and what isn't true. Welcome to the Sunlight Podcast. In this show, we're talking about taxes, money, and careers for creative people who have a big vision for changing the world with their work. I'm your host, Hannah Cole, artist, tax pro, and the founder of Sunlight Tax. If you're an artist, designer, or creative entrepreneur who wants to grow your business sustainably, manage your taxes, and build a stash of fuck you money so you can control your own time and have a bigger impact with your work, you are in the right place. Hello. Today, I want to talk to you about the number one question that I get asked in my one-on-one consultations. That is, do I need an LLC? Or what do I do with my LLC? So let's just start off by saying I am not a lawyer. And an LLC is a legal entity. And if you're going to form one, you should consult a lawyer so they can set it up for you. So just let's get it out of the way that I'm not giving you legal advice in this podcast. That said, the LLC sort of has an interaction with your accounting and it's part of business setup. Potentially, you don't necessarily need it, right? But because it comes in that suite of things you might want to do as you set up your business or as your business grows and you want to amplify the protections that you have, it's a really important topic. And as an accountant, I have a specific orientation to the LLC, which is not the version that you're going to hear from a lawyer. So I will give you the down and dirty from the accounting side of having an LLC. All right, so let's get started. Because what I do is help people set up the hard parts of their business. Primarily this is around numbers and tax systems. So setting up to pay taxes quarterly, setting up bookkeeping, setting up retirement accounts that are tax advantaged, right? But another one of the big components of what I am teaching generally is how to set up your business, right? How to kind of check all the boxes you need. And so many people ask me about LLCs, which is a real concern. I think a lot of us overhear conversations like we don't get an explicit education about this, but we'll talk to our friends and they're like, oh, you need an LLC, right? So a lot of us have this knee-jerk feeling like I'm not official until I have an LLC. And so I want to dispel some myths and some rumors about this and tell you kind of what is and what isn't true. So first and foremost, I want to tell you this. A lot of people think when they form an LLC that their taxes change. And I want to tell you first and foremost, that is not true. Okay. LLCs, single member LLCs, are called by the IRS disregarded entities. And the reason they're called disregarded entities is because the IRS disregards them. An LLC, in other words, if you are a sole member, right, one person, your LLC has no bearing on your taxes. It will not change anything about your taxes. Okay. Super important to know. Now, I do want to clarify that there is something different that happens if you are a multi-member LLC. If you think about it, when you form an LLC, you are going to tie your social security number or your tax ID number to a business EIN. Okay, this is one of the functions of having an LLC. And you might at the same time be tying a name to it, right? So the name might not be the name of you, the person. It might be its own business name. It doesn't have to be. I could form an LLC that's Hannah Cole LLC. As it happened, the LLC I did form, and yes, I have an LLC, is called Sunlight Tax LLC. So that's really important. Legally, Sunlight Tax LLC has its own ID number. It has an EIN, and that EIN at the Secretary of State of North Carolina is tied to my social security number. And because I'm just one person and there's just one social security number there, what that means is the IRS knows who to tax, right? When Sunlight Tax files a tax return before I turned into an S Corp, which is a whole separate conversation and not what I'm going to cover today. But when I was filing, Sunlight Tax LLC was going on my Schedule C on my individual 1040 tax form. I put the EIN at the top of the Schedule C, but on my tax form is my social security number. So it's very clear that EIN and Sunlight Tax attaches to my social security number for me, Hannah Cole. Okay. So that's what happens to you when you form an LLC and you're one person. Now, to clarify, if you are a multi-member LLC, so if you go out and form an LLC with another person, with another entity, with multiple entities, right? Maybe I'm in a dance troupe and 3 of us decide together to form an LLC, call it Awesome Dancers Inc. Well, now that's not a single member LLC. And now that actually is going to change our taxes. Okay. Why? Because there's 3 social security numbers, right? The IRS has to know how the taxes get split. When you make a profit, how do we tax that profit? We're going to tax it. Who does the bill go to? Right? So the multi-member LLC actually does change your tax situation because by default, a multi-member LLC will be taxed as a partnership. Okay. And when you're taxed as a partnership, you actually have to file a separate corporate tax return called a 1065, which is a partnership tax return. So that actually has a whole different due date, March 15th. And when you file it, the product of that filing is K1. So each of the owners will get their own K1. And that K1, which is the product of the corporate filing, flows through to that individual person's 1040 individual personal income tax return. When we say that an organization is a pass-through entity, that's the passing through part. The K1 passes through your share of the income to your tax return. Okay. So if you're a multi-member LLC, we have to tie multiple tax ID numbers to that corporation. And we have to know, if you have a 2-person organization, is it a 50-50 split of income? Do we tax each of you on 1/2? Or is it a 90-10? I'm aware of partnerships out there that have a 90-10 split, right? So 90% of the profit is taxable to this person, 10% is taxable to that person, okay? So multi-member LLCs do change your taxes. Single member LLCs do not, okay? All right, clarified that one. So something that this brings up though, is that an LLC is a legal entity, but it is not a tax entity. So I know that is a whole confusion in and of itself, but what do I mean here? So when you form an LLC, you are forming a separate legal entity. That is true. And you do it with the state. When you file an LLC, when you form an LLC, you're going to register with the Secretary of State in the state that you're in. Okay. And it becomes a legal entity. Okay. And let me tell you about what actually happens when you form an LLC. When you form an LLC, essentially the role of an LLC, the reason that you do it is for liability protection. One of the L's, so the 2 L's in LLC stand for limited liability. So the point of an LLC is to limit your liability. Okay. I want to be really clear that if what you're looking to do is to be, quote, official, you do not need an LLC for that. Okay. You do not. What you need an LLC for and what an LLC does for you is it limits the ability of someone who sues you from taking your personal assets in a lawsuit where they win. Okay. That's why you get an LLC. So in other words, how likely are you to be sued? And do you have personal assets that you want to shield from lawsuit? Okay. That's the role of the LLC. So what does that mean? Let me even go a little further in explaining that. Forming an LLC basically creates a separate entity outside of yourself that, that's it. It's a separate entity outside of yourself. Okay. So let's take an example of me in my painting practice. Okay. So I'm Hannah Cole. If I were to form an LLC for my painting practice, before I had an LLC, my painting practice, Hannah Cole painter and me, Hannah Cole, we are one in the same. We are one in the same person and entity. Okay. If somebody comes to an open studio event that I host, for example, and they trip and fall in my studio and they sue me and I have no LLC, well, they can sue me. And if I'm found at fault, then they can get whatever assets I have at all, right? They can go after my business assets and they can also go after my personal assets, right? So if that lawsuit is successful, they could potentially have access to my house, my car, my 401k, my kids' college fund. Okay. That's how it works. That's what the liability is that I have as a business. And so that's the sort of default setup that you're in. Now, I will be honest with you, as a painter, I don't have very much liability. So I have never formed an LLC for my painting practice because I don't actually host open studio events. I'm a gallery artist. I'm not bringing people into my space. My work is shown at my gallery. And so I'm not that worried about this stuff, right? My gallery's insurance is generally going to cover, even if somebody is at my show and they trip and fall, it's going to be on my gallery, not on me. Okay. So I don't have very much liability. I'm not that worried about being sued as a painter. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but do I want to pay $200 a year to the Secretary of State of North Carolina and have a, filing obligation every year, which is pretty minor, PS. But do I want to do that? No, not really. I don't. But it means the Hannah Cole and Hannah Cole Painter are one and the same thing. Now, Sunlight Tax is quite different. I do have an LLC for Sunlight Tax. And here's why. People get mad about their money. And there's quite a lot more risk and liability in what I do as a tax professional, as an educator on tax and finances, right? I do want to be more careful. So I have an LLC, and here's what the LLC does. And here's what an LLC would do for you if you chose to form one. It separates Sunlight Tax, which is owned by me solely. It separates Sunlight Tax from me, Hannah Cole. So now what happens if somebody decides to sue Sunlight Tax, they can come after the assets of Sunlight Tax. And there's nothing I could do to prevent that because that is the entity, right? So all my business assets are subject to that lawsuit. Now, what are you going to get if you sue Sunlight Tax? Not that much, right? My assets are this microphone that if you're watching this on the video, you can see. I've got this microphone. I've got this computer. I've got some lights back there that I use when I give a presentation. I don't have a lot. There's not a lot to take from Sunlight Tax. I have a whole lot of software. I don't know how you would get anything out of that. So essentially, there's not much to go after in Sunlight Tax. Now, Hannah Cole, yeah, there's more to go after. Most people, not just me, but pretty much everybody, your wealth is generally held personally, not through your business. So what does that mean? I have a 401k. I have a college fund for my kids. I have a house. Those things are protected by the LLC that I have for Sunlight Tax. So if you were to sue Sunlight Tax, you could not touch my 401k. Okay. You could not touch my house. So that's really important to me because I do have some liability when it comes to my tax education work. All right. God, please don't sue me, everybody. It makes me. I learned the hard way when I was on a co-op board in New York City that you cannot prevent crazy people from suing you for completely ridiculous reasons. We dealt with a frivolous lawsuit when I was on that co-op board, and oh my God, it was so scary and so terrifying and awful. Anyway, small aside. Okay, so that's the reason that you form an LLC. What does it mean? What are the things you want to know when you do form an LLC? So first of all, the decision is, what is my liability, right? What are my chances of being sued? Am I in a field or am I doing work where, people might kind of fly off the handle and get really, really mad and want to go after me? Could I make a mistake that somebody could want to sue me for, right? That's an important assessment that you want to make. When I'm talking to creative people, like I said, as a painter who doesn't have open studio events, I don't really have a lot of liability, and I'm not particularly worried about a lawsuit. If I were a choreographer in the theater, if I were in any field where I were operating heavy machinery, if I had a landscaping business and I had people using lawnmowers and cutting branches off trees, I would definitely get an LLC because, those are just situations where a worker could get injured. Like things can happen in those situations. Those are much more clear-cut cases. So essentially, you want to assess your risk of liability. Like how likely is something to go very wrong, someone to get hurt or injured by your work, and do you need that liability protection? I will also tell you one thing that a lawyer's not going to tell you, which is there is an alternate path that is a little cheaper. So it's not actually critical that you become an LLC. You actually can get a lot of the same liability protection simply by getting business professional insurance. Okay. So that is something that you probably do want to look into if you have a sense of liability. Now, could you do both? Yeah, absolutely. And they do play different roles, right? The LLC limits your liability, so it gives you a protection against your personal assets being taken in a lawsuit. But if somebody were to sue me and be successful, I would still have to pay out a certain amount. And without business insurance, I would just have to pay it out of pocket, right? So business insurance might still be a good idea on top of my LLC. So I'd have some money to pay out, right? I wouldn't actually have to spend all the money in my business to handle a lawsuit should one come. So in case you're curious, at Sunlight Tax, I do in fact have business professional liability insurance. In fact, for almost every accountant you ever meet, I hope every accountant is going to have professional, what's called errors and omissions insurance. And depending on your field, there may be specific types of insurance you need. I also have cyber liability insurance because, oh my gosh, an online business is definitely subject to cyber attacks, and I'm constantly in fear of that. So I have some pretty locked down procedures over here, but I carry insurance just because. So it's worth looking into professional liability insurance. And if you're if you're in the early stages of business where you're feeling particularly budget conscious, then you might do a first step with just liability insurance and then work up to the LLC a little bit later. That said, if you're in a field with substantial liability, go for it. You might want to just go ahead and do the LLC right away. But if you don't feel that you're going to be in a lawsuit, if you're not carrying a lot of risk, you don't need an LLC. You also don't need to get an LLC in order to have an EIN. You can just get an EIN in literally 5 minutes for free from the IRS website. And PS, please do not pay an online service to get you an EIN. It's free on the IRS website. It takes 5 minutes. Okay. I hate it when I see that people have paid somebody to literally go to the IRS website for them and type in a couple pieces of information that you could have done in 5 minutes flat. Okay. But that said, if you want to get an EIN and you think you're going to form an LLC, I would wait because forming an LLC is going to get you a new EIN. And now you're going to have two, and you can have some confusion, including a little messiness in your taxes if you have two EINs. So you do want to actually be careful about obtaining unnecessary EINs, okay? Because it can cause a mess in your taxes. Another important thing to know when you form an LLC, you're going to register with the Secretary of State. You're going to, do some kind of name search and determine a name that is, okay for you to use. And it's going to tie into your Social Security number. I want you to know, and I especially say this in case you are a person who's ever been in, an abusive situation, if you've had a stalker, if you've got a restraining order out against anybody, I want you to know, to be particularly aware, your address becomes a matter of public record. And so if you have any shady characters in your past that you don't want to know your home address, getting an LLC is a time where you probably want to get yourself a PO box. Okay. Just going to put that PSA out there for anybody who has threatening people in their world. I hope you don't, but let's just make sure you stay safe. The other thing is there's an obligation side when you have an LLC. So you are going to register with your Secretary of State and you're going to pay some kind of annual filing fee. Okay. This is a requirement from every state, including DC. You're going to have to pay an annual filing fee for your LLC. States vary in how much they charge. State of North Carolina, where I am, it's $200 a year. Other states, it's often a little higher. And also, you're going to have to make sure you keep your articles of organization up to date. Articles of organization are part of the paperwork that your lawyer will help you produce as you form your LLC, if you do that. And essentially, your filing obligation is to pay the fee every year and also to just update your articles of organization. Essentially, you're just saying, yeah, I'm still the boss. I'm still the owner, right? Ownership has not changed hands. Okay. That's essentially the role. So in North Carolina, I get very pleasantly a little email reminder every year, and it's an online system. And all I have to do really is just like certify, check a couple boxes. It says like, is this still the owner? Is this still the address? And I say, yes, yes. And I'm done. It takes me no more than 5 minutes. Okay. So that's what you do have to do. And of course, if you don't do that, then your LLC will go out of date and you will not be in compliance. So that's important. And you should just be aware that LLCs are searchable. So accountants know this. When we have clients who have LLCs, we will go ahead and look up our clients on the Secretary of State website because it's public data. So you can go see what LLCs exist in your state, frankly, in any state. And it can be a way to do a name search, although I think there's more efficient ways that lawyers would have more to say to you about. Now, let's talk about the one accounting piece that is very important when you form an LLC. I'm going to tell you what the legal role is of an LLC and why accounting can back that up or make it fail. Okay. So here's the accounting piece of an LLC. So while an LLC does not change your taxes if you're a sole proprietor, it does make it extra important that you have a separate business bank account, that you keep your business and personal items separate. Critically important. Here's why. When you form an LLC, legally, what you are doing is creating a so-called corporate veil. That is the legal term, a corporate veil in between you, the person, and you, the business. Okay. That is what you've done. You are paying for that separation. Okay. And it's really important separation because in a lawsuit, you're saying, okay, you can sue my business, you can get my business assets, but that veil will protect everything behind it that's personal. You don't get to touch any of that stuff. Now, here's where accounting plays in. If you commingle your business and personal bank accounts, if you make personal expenses out of your business bank account, if you're buying groceries, paying for childcare, paying your rent out of your business bank account, making personal expenses out of there, you are not upholding that separation. And if you were in a lawsuit, you could have your bank records subpoenaed. They could identify that you are doing that you are commingling your business and personal accounts, and they can do a thing called piercing the corporate veil. In other words, your sloppy accounting can invalidate the protection of your LLC. So you've just been wasting your filing fee every year, wasting the money you paid to a lawyer, and wasting the protection you thought you were paying for by making personal expenses out of your business account. I am always going to tell you, you should have a separate business and personal bank account. I think everyone with a business should have a separate business and personal bank account. There's very important reasons for this. It makes your bookkeeping easier. The IRS wants you to do it anyway. But another very key reason to keep those accounts separate is to maintain the corporate veil. Okay. To keep your business only business and keep your personal only personal so that you maintain that protection that you are paying for. All right. That's the accounting side of having an LLC. So let's talk about your next steps. All right. So one, you want to assess your risk of liability, right? Everybody's liability is going to be different. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to give you advice whether you should or shouldn't file an LLC. This is your decision, but you just want to take an objective look about what kind of liability you have in your type of business. Are you, giving tax advice? You should have an LLC. If you, and that's not legal advice, by the way, if you're a painter and you never have open studios, you never interact with the public, you might not need an LLC at all. Okay. So it's really going to vary. Consider business insurance. Professional liability insurance is there to back up the protection of an LLC. You can have it instead. You can have it in addition. It's also an option. And it's worth talking to an insurance broker about the liability in your business just to see where it is, right? To help protect yourself. That is actually a good step anyway. When you're forming a business or when you're shoring up an existing business, it's a good idea to consider insurance and to just talk to a broker an insurance broker about what kind of liability your field tends to have and what kind of insurance is available. Okay. I also want you to know that I think a lot of people have a very false idea about when their business becomes official. And they think that they don't have a business until they form an LLC. And I am here to set the record straight on that. You do. You can easily have a business before you have an LLC. And in fact, there's many businesses that don't have LLCs. My painting business is an example of one. I've been a professional painter with a painting business for 17, 18 years now. And I've never formed an LLC. Does that mean it's not a business? Oh, hell no. It definitely is. Okay. So you can absolutely have a business without having an LLC. It's not a necessary step to be a business. I will now tell you what the IRS definition is of a business. Okay. Your business starts, according to the IRS, the moment you advertise. This is really important. A lot of people don't know that, but advertising is your motive. It signals your intent to make a profit. And that's why that is the start time. Okay. So if you think about it, the act of advertising is the act of saying, hello, world, hello, potential clients, I'm open. Here's what I've got. You can come and get it. Right? That is what advertising is. Now, a lot of us in different fields might call it different things. Some of us don't even call it advertising. I've had a lot of artists say to me, oh, I don't advertise. And I'm like, you know what? You totally do. And let me show you how. So like artists like to, in the art world, we like to be very coy about things that sound too overtly businessy or markety. So we don't like to say advertising. We like to say visibility. We like to say, raise my profile, right? Things like that. So if you're in a field that's touchy about money in that way, you may use different words too, and that's completely fine. But I do want you to be able to identify what your signals are that you are open for business, that someone could come and partake of your services or your products, because that is fundamentally what the IRS is going to call advertising. And the fact that you're doing it is going to be a piece of proof that you are, in fact, operating a business. All right. So that's what I've got for you today on the role of an LLC, what it's for. I hope you have come to understand through this what an LLC is, why you would want to form one, what it takes to form one, and if you need one, right? Because we don't all need one. And most importantly, I also want you to understand that when you form an LLC, if you are a sole proprietor, a single member, there's no change to your taxes. Your LLC does not change your taxes at all. Now, my goal in general here at Sunlight Tax is to give you the why behind business setup operations like forming an LLC, as well as setting up stuff for your taxes. Okay. It's important to me to tell you what you do and don't need to spend time on, right? Because I think a lot of us, whether we are from a historically marginalized group, whether we were told as kids that money is for those people over there, but not for us, right? Or if you are in a field like a creative field, a caring field, a healing field, a spiritual field, where we tend to deprioritize money, often to our own great expense, but where we tend to deprioritize money, you just may have never gotten a financial education or a business education. And to me, the service that I want to provide to you is to help you understand what the various components are and whether you need them or not, right? In a way that feels non-judgmental, just straightforward. Here's what it is. And you might need it, you might not, right? I just want to be really honest with you so that you don't have to waste time doing things or money, doing things like filing for an LLC when you don't need one, right? So it's my goal to help you with that overwhelm, with that confusion, with that fear of judgment, so that you know what you do need and what you don't need, what's worth your time, what's worth your money, and what is not. So I would like to preview for you something that's coming here at Sunlight Tax. I'm going to be opening the doors to my program, Money Bootcamp, for the last time of this tax season. So I'm about to start opening the doors one last time before the tax deadline. And I want you to know that I'm kicking that off with a free class. The class is Understand Your Taxes and Make Money. the ultimate guide to the hard parts of self-employment. It's going to be a little over 1 hour. And unlike months past, there is not going to be a replay. I am revising this class. I'm going to make it more about taxes than the ones in the past. Because as we get close to the deadline, I know that taxes are the thing that is on your mind. So it's going to be live, and I'm going to give it my all for those of you who mark it on your calendar and show up and make the space to commit to this 1 hour. I'm going to make it super valuable, super awesome for you. We're going to go through some common confusions in your taxes. I'm going to talk to you about the systems you do need and the systems you don't need. Right? This is the whole point of what I do, is trying to clarify what you do and don't need so that you spend your time where you do need to and you stop wasting it where you don't. Okay. So the live class is on March 23rd at noon East Coast time. So that's 9 a.m. Pacific. You do need to register to be able to come. You can register at go.sunlighttax.com/free. Again, that class is on March 23rd at noon. You can register at go.sunlighttax.com/free. And it's going to be live. There's going to be no replay. It's going to be awesome and super valuable. I hope to see you there. All right. Thanks for joining me, everybody, today. I will see you next week. Bye. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. It really helps, and share it with a friend. I'm so grateful. This podcast is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links we reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.